Hello, everyone, and welcome to another live stream. I was going to say Sunday roast for some reason, but this is not the Sunday roast. This is the live stream. So I have a wonderful guest with me once again, Professor Tim Wilson. Tim, can you tell us a bit about yourself for anyone who's been living under a rock and is not familiar with you?
Oh, no, no, no. We've done Sunday roast together. But I've never been on this with you before, one on one.
Oh,
So
it's
this
great,
is an
great to
entirely
have you.
new experience.
Yes.
It's really nice to be here. So I don't know what to say about me. I came to the
Maybe we
game.
can, yeah, we can start with the YouTube stuff, and then we get into the really,
Yes,
really
I have a
interesting stuff
YouTube
like
channel.
UKIP and you
Oh,
spending
please
some time
don't
in
tell me about
Russia.
that. Yeah, well, I infiltrated UKIP because somebody insisted. Somebody was going on and on and on about how racist UKIP was, and I said, "Well, do you have evidence?" And they didn't have any evidence. And then I met some UKIPers, and they were very keen on taking me to an event, and I thought, well, why not? They seem very sweet, and I went along, and within minutes, really, I was asked if I would stand as a counselor. And and I thought, well, why not? At least that will be a way of finding out whether or not these people are really racist. And they just seem like cute, sort of ex-conservatives for the most part. And uh, and that went along for a few weeks, and then suddenly I was asked if I would stand for Parliament, and that was an opportunity to go up to be vetted and to be processed and to meet all the top people, and all the top people seemed to me to be people with a sort of background in the National Front and there's so they were the people controlling the show, and so I wasn't at all surprised that Farage's campaign manager in Thanet was an ex-National Front man, because that's who they were. That's what they were doing. So the people put out in front of the public were people who were from the Conservative Party or people who were busy waving flags, and the people who were checking what they were saying were ex-National Fronters. And I said, well, now I've got this job. Can I say something about Islam? No! And I said, but I want to say something nice about Islam. And oh, you can't do that. That's worse. And it was, and then I made friends with various people, and around the country. I thought if I've got a national opportunity, I must do something with it as a sort of theologian. That's my subject. And I was going backwards and forwards to Russia at the time, teaching. I think for the most part in Russia at that point I was teaching in the education department, and I became a professor in the education department. And then I was moved back to my subject, to theology, and about that time everything became so unpleasant, and I was feeling very uncomfortable after Putin went through into Crimea. And I was amazed at how quickly the university picked that up. So the day he went through, there was a great big relief map on the wall outside the rector's office, and I was very chummy with the rector. And that relief map was changed overnight to include Crimea
Crimea.
as part of
That was
Russian
in 20.
territory.
That was in 2014.
Yeah, and I thought this is not something I want to be involved in. I think the UKIP thing was just shortly after that, and I was already sort of trying to pull out, and I didn't quite know how to. And also, I thought, my influence over there is positive, um, but there came a point where it just wasn't safe any longer, and I was very much aware of that. And I came back to the UK, I think, to arrange a conference, and uh, and it was good. And I also had to attend a conference in St. Petersburg, and I'd never been to St. Petersburg, so I was quite looking forward to that. And I was in Cambridge. I was doing a bit of teaching in Cambridge, and I don't know whether you know Cambridge, but when it rains in Cambridge, your soul is destroyed. It's very dark, and the streets are very. I'm an Oxford person, and the streets are very narrow. I've warmed to Cambridge enormously. I think Cambridge is now what Oxford was like in my day, and it's lovely and delightful. But when it rains, you just want to kill yourself. And the telephone rang, and I picked it up, and there was this fellow saying, "Would you like to be on a TV show?" And I thought, well, for how long? And he said, "Oh, we'd only need you for a couple of weeks. You'll be the old fart we get rid of quickly." And I thought, okay, I've got a month to kill, and then I've got to go back to Putin. And I'd already by that point met him. I'd shaken hands with Satan, and I didn't particularly relish the experience of doing it again. And I
Did
did the
you
show.
did you speak to him in Russian?
I was told I wasn't allowed to speak to him in English, but I think all I managed was "da,"
Okay.
um, which wasn't a reference to his paternity. Um, but it was terrifying. I had to change my underwear afterwards. It was I was called out of my lecture room regularly to go and do these lineups, and I never knew who it was going to be. And when I saw Putin, he's terribly tiny, smaller than Tom Cruise, and you can see the stacked shoes because his legs are very good, really. I mean, he benefits from high heels, and it's extraordinary. He didn't have much to say to me anyway, but and I don't know whether he'd had briefings that I had all the wrong friends. But yeah, it's and so UKIP. I remember that there was a thing where there's a fellow called Humza Yousaf up in
Yes,
Scotland.
First Minister.
Was due for an interview on Scottish radio, I think, with a UKIP MEP called David Coburn, another person who looks a little bit like a toad, and allegedly. Because I was talking about a fellow I met called Pyotr Tolstoy, who's a loathsome individual, practically ran the Duma, and he was one of the people who was instrumental in pushing forward the anti-gay law, but he was also quite excited about pushing a narrative that Jews had desecrated Orthodox churches, and I remember saying to him that I didn't think that was true, and he wasn't very impressed with my questioning his veracity. But Humza Yousaf was due to do this interview, and Humza was late because he was working as the right-hand man of Nicola Sturgeon, and he was quite young at the time. So this would have been about 2016 or 2015, maybe 2014. I don't remember. Um, and Humza was late, and the interviewer asked David Coburn, do you know where your friend is, Humza Yousaf? And David Coburn says, Humza Yousaf, or as I would call him, Abu Hamza. And Abu Hamza being the man with the hooks in jail in New York. And Humza said to me, well, what are you going to do now? And I said, well, I don't know. Maybe I have to resign. He said, let's go big. And the next day, I found myself on the front page of the Daily Mail, and whisked up to the BBC and stuck in a box with green screen, and then made to confront Farage. And sitting there for so long, you're thinking, what can I say? And I found out that at the point, I said, you can't toss this off over a pint of beer. And that was the quote which was put into the newspapers the following day. I think they assumed I didn't realize it could possibly have been slightly outre, or slightly dodgy expression. I practiced that one for about 2 hours. I mean, it helped. It helped later on to be able to do the straight face, pure filth in
I
pantomime.
love, and people who watch your channel love. I think a lot of the innuendo you use, and a lot of the language which can be bent in different directions. We have a comment from Brad who says, Max and Tim, if you need any Boris Johnson jokes, like his bollocks, I'm loaded.
Boris Johnson doesn't. You don't need Boris Johnson jokes. He's there. He's there incarnate. He is the joke. Oh, let's stain the sofa. Ha ha! Nads.
So what do you think about Nadine Dorries, who's defected to Reform? You had a few run-ins with Nadine, didn't you?
I did because of reality TV. So I was on the show called The Circle, and the show itself was great. And in fact, I didn't get booted out after 2 weeks. I I remained, and I won the the viewers vote, which was rather nice. I loved being on the show actually, and I made good friends with a fellow called Woody Cook and a fellow called James, who was supposed to be my adversary. And I remember when Woody came on, he said, "Well, I've got a sort of a secret. My mum's Zoe Ball," and everyone round the table did so. Ooh, and I sort of I have no idea who this is, and and he said, "My dad's Fat Boy Slim," and I looked completely lost. And one of the girls on the table leaned over and said, "Do you know who they are, Tim?" And I said, "No." I got a great hug from Woody about that from that, and then afterwards, Zoe came up and kissed me and said, "Thank you for looking after my boy." So we became friends. I thought it was unexpected and rather lovely. And when I was ill, Woody was up here immediately, and his father and his mother were sending me really warm messages on Instagram, which was really heartening. I was in hospital and I thought I was going to die. I didn't, thankfully. But yeah, it's been a sort of helter-skelter. But the problem really was that after the show, it was grim. The sort of control that a production company has over you while you're in the show is so extreme that basically when you leave, you'll say yes to anything, and that sense of losing your agency, it's very difficult to get that back afterwards. And they continue. I felt that that control continued to the extent as I didn't know whether I was coming or going. And I wrote an article I met various people. I knew various people who tried to kill themselves, and I stepped in and helped a few people. And I felt deeply responsible to stand up because the system in place isn't right.
Yes.
And it still isn't right. And Boris Johnson called there was a committee hearing in the House of Commons over the Love Island and Jeremy Kyle show
Yeah.
and the deaths on those shows, and they only heard from production staff. They only heard from 4 participants in addition before Boris called the general election, and that committee was stopped and it was never reconvened. And yet, and yet the Ofcom directions went forward. So they very much favour production. They're exactly what production wanted. Production now has 18 months of control over participants after the show. And it's worded in such a way that, if you're thinking this is good, it sounds good. 18 months to provide psychiatric support. Well, that's 18 months to continue to control somebody.
Yes.
And I wrote an article in, I think, The Independent. They asked me to write, and I I wrote, and I said that this was the period after the show was 18 months of sheer hell. It was worse than being held at gunpoint, and that's happened to me on 3 occasions. On each occasion, you think how small that gun is, um, and yeah, I've been very lucky. I didn't get killed then either, and the and then I hemorrhaged badly, and I was diagnosed with cancer. In fact, I went off to the hospital after hemorrhaging. It was yellow trousers, so it wasn't a great look. And you go into the hospital, you get put on a bed, and you wait around for a long time, thinking this is awful. And then a doctor comes up behind you and pulls down your trousers, and the nurse comes up on the other side and says, "Are you Professor Tim from the Circle?" And the doctor says, "That's just my finger." And it doesn't stop. You have a little bit of fame, and on the one hand, you've got taxi drivers leaning out of the taxi saying, "Hello, Tim," and on the other hand, you've got people with their fingers up your backside, and it is extraordinary. And I find, even now when I go to London, I get stopped on the street and asked for a selfie. And it's not something I expected. Now it's often to do with YouTube and less to do with the circle. But
So tell us more about YouTube. How did you get into it, and why did you get into it?
well, YouTube was why I got asked to be on the circle.
Hmm.
Because I'm a filmmaker. I make animated films. And I draw all the time. So I'm doing a thing at the moment. So there's a little picture. But this one people might recognize. This is from the good old days.
Wow.
When I'm looking at something, I tend to draw at the same time, which is how I feel I get to know people in political life. I draw them, and I think if you draw somebody, you sort of look into their soul. It's when I drew Nigel Farage, I realized there wasn't any. Uh, and Nadine Dorries, I realized there was quite a lot of soul, just misplaced. Um, but how did I get into YouTube? I wanted to make a film about how to write a good essay, so I did it. Um, and it's now got about 5.5 or 6 million views. And some little researcher in Channel 4 had seen this and thought, oh, we'll put him on our reality TV show. Um, and I think what they hadn't realised is I have a background in performance. I have an equity card, and because I've spent so much time doing directing or designing. I was directing and designing opera for years. I think the last one I did was in Malta. So, and um, and I found it very stressful. Uh, but knowing how all that background stuff works, and I was doing stuff for Lucy Worsley on telly. Knowing how it all works, you suddenly find yourself back in front of the camera or back on stage, and you feel really comfortable because you know all these other people are working to support you, and you're just the front of you're just at the cutting edge. You're the front end of the production machine, but that machine is work. Many people are working behind you, and you've got a lot of responsibility, of course. But I loved being on camera. But and YouTube, I just do what I do, and I never check it. I never look at myself afterwards. People say,
How
"Oh,
many videos do you put out a day?
well, I learnt this from Alex Belfield."
A great teacher for anyone who doesn't know. Can you tell us a little bit about Alex Belfield for anyone who doesn't know?
I had a run-in with Alex Belfield, but and he was slightly rude to me. Other people have had much worse run-ins with Alex Belfield, and I'm very sympathetic. But I thought Alex Belfield was very talented, but I mean, his politics are not mine. But I will listen and talk to anybody. And if somebody, I always tell my students that if they want to know the answer to something, go and talk to somebody who doesn't agree with you,
Yes.
and you'll start to structure your argument so much better. Um, and uh, and so people say, "Oh, you were part of UKIP," and I think, well, I was never part of UKIP. Um, but I wanted to know what they thought, and if they actually had a good idea. I'd lived in Europe long enough to know that Europe wasn't working properly. I think it's working significantly better since Brexit, because I think Brexit gave the whole system a jolt, and I don't think it was good for us.
No.
I think we had a responsibility, and we exercised that responsibility during the First World War and the Second World War, and we should have exercised that responsibility over the failures in Europe, and particularly the aggression of the northern countries to the southern countries. I lived in Greece for a long time, and I was appalled at the way, for example, the Dublin Convention, is the Dublin Protocol, I
Yeah, the
can't remember,
Dublin Protocol.
um,
Yeah, convention.
basically forces countries like Italy, Greece, Spain to take all the migrants, and they don't have the money to deal with this.
No.
And I got involved with um, sort of Greek problems of pushback and torture. So the Greek Coast Guard were torturing people, and I got directly involved in that, and I eventually took a case through the European Court of Human Rights. We won. It took 11 years. It was supposed to change the law. The law has still not been changed in Greece. And I suppose until that happens, I won't go back to Greece. But my heart belongs in Greece, and my default foreign language is Greek. But I think the longer I stay away from Greece, the more the more bookish and non-demotic my Greek becomes. And but I have friends from that area of the world. I have lots of friends from that area of the world in Greece, Albania. I'm in the Albanian Encyclopedia of Art.
Wow.
A whole page, 2 pages, I think. I've written the preface to Albanian, I think Albanian art. You can go and buy it in the Tirana airport. I think I might have written a preface to it and the Albanian translation of some books by John Maynard Keynes. So I did a lot of books in Greece and in Greek. I used to write for the Greek edition of Kathimerini. I think I wrote the theatre reports in Greek. Um, and I sort of abandoned all that because I thought they were behaving badly. Um,
It
and
must have been a huge loss for you.
I was I'm still sort of distraught, really. I remember going to the Greek Archbishop at the time, a man called Christodoulos, and, and I said, "Please, will you intercede?" Um, and the following day, he went on television and he said, because this was a Turkish man who'd been raped by the Greek Coast Guard, and Christodoulos went on television and said, "Oli Turki ni varvary, all Turks are barbarians." And I just thought, well, that's his answer. He's an out and out shit. And he came up with other things. If you are Greek, you are Orthodox. If you are Orthodox, you are Greek. And I remember, I think that must have been beforehand because I went I when I went to him, I said, "Well, what about me? I'm Orthodox. I'm not Greek. I have no intention of being Greek. I'm British. I'm English." Um, and his answer in the end was because I made such a fuss through the newspapers. um, if you prod me, I will continue to move. And eventually he held a an Orthodox liturgy in his house where he invited Greek-speaking priests to celebrate the liturgy. And shortly after that, I was forced to leave Greece because people were out to get me.
My
They wanted
goodness.
to stop this court case going ahead anyway, and they came to the door with guns. On one occasion, they came to the door with guns, and the person who had the gun was somebody whose life I'd rescued about a year before. I'd actually stood in front of a gun when he was being threatened, and and
And
he
what
was
convinced him to turn the
well, he
gun
was
on you?
he was a Kurdish paramilitary, and I eventually discovered he was a terrorist as well, which is a bit awful. But when you're a foreigner in another country, you can't read all the signs, and you make friends with very odd people. And so he'd planted a bomb in Turkey, so he was very much um, a wanted man. But he'd been given a passport by Greece, and he spoke very good English, um, and he spoke very good Greek. He was really quite gifted. Um, and somebody tried to kill him, and I stood in the way of the gun. And then I sort of moved away. I sort of got lost. And I think he didn't know who he was sent to go and see. And so I looked through the keyhole, and there were all these people, and there was this fellow, and I said, "Come in," and he said, "We are here to kill you." "Oh, don't be ridiculous. Put your guns in the corner. Tea? Would you like milk?" um, Tea à l'anglaise. And of course, in the kitchen, my legs were shaking like jelly. But on show, um, I was very British, and I thought,
I don't even know how I'd react in a situation like
well,
that,
this is
but
the stuff of a Fado farce, isn't it? Really, it's a play that doesn't quite go wrong, and somehow, you've rehearsed all these crazy moments in your head, I suppose, not necessarily with guns, but certainly with a sort of absurdity, and this seemed to me to be absurd. And then shortly after that, the Turkish embassy rang me and said, "We need to see you because we think you're in danger, in serious danger, and you ought to take your friend and go." and leave by a safe route, which has to be a bus, and everything else is being watched. And we left that day, and it was
So
terrifying.
what year was that?
That was 2004.
Like for a moment, I thought you were going to say like maybe in the 1960s, 1970s, or 1980s, or something like that. But it's as recent as that. It's
Yeah.
insane.
And I remember writing to politicians in Greece, and I remember getting an interview with one woman. Can't remember her name now, but she'd been an actress, um, and she'd acted with I think her name was Katselli or something. Anyway, um, and who was that wonderful Greek actress who was in Never on a Sunday? Ένα και δύο και τρία και τέσσερα παιδιά. Um, Melina Mercouri. She'd acted with Melina Mercouri. Anyway, I went. I went to what I thought was her office. I got invited to her office, and it was her house. And I went upstairs, and uh, and I think by in that period of time, she'd worked out who I was and that I wasn't sort of friendly, and she pretended that she was the secretary or the cleaner or something, and she said, uh, "Do you know Greek?" And I said, "Well, yes." She says, we cannot. You're Greek, not good enough. And this is, Do you know French?" And I said, "Well, yes, a little bit." And she said, "No, Maria Katselli doesn't know French." And I said, "But aren't you Maria Katselli?" She said, "No, I am the maid." And all the way around her house were photographs of her in various positions. I thought, some maid. Anyway, so we didn't get anywhere with that. But there was fantastic moment after fantastic moment, and it was one reason I think I got interested in politics was all of that. And I came back to the UK, um, and I just felt I didn't know how to express it at first, I think, and gradually with Brexit and then with being on the circle, I realized that my YouTube had a purpose. And Alex Belfield, as I say, I looked at what he was doing. He was doing 14 videos a day and putting them out very early, and he was he was getting lots of views, and I thought, this is obviously what you do. You do the magic number is 14. So, um, but I do it all myself, so I have no researcher. I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I read through as many newspapers as I can. I make a few notes. I live by notes. If you saw my kitchen, literally the wall in front of me is filled with notes of what I might say, what I want to say, what I like saying. I'd much rather read it if I can, but often I've just got two or three notes, and I can. I can keep going quite. You're not getting a word in here, so this is the problem. I can just start.
I could listen to you all night, but I'd like to. We can
We,
discuss
we
some.
were talking about Nadine Dorries, weren't we?
Yes.
Mad Mads. And
Now she's a member of Reform UK, so she's jumped ship
well,
from
yes,
the Conservatives. But I think she was always of the mentality of reform. No.
no, well, maybe she was on the right. The problem is, I have to put my cards on the table. I'm a conservative. I still think of myself as conservative. I think the Conservative Party has left me.
It's a
And
usual thing people say.
each time I stood for election, so after the UKIP debacle, the Conservatives grabbed me and asked me if I would stand for election in various places, and I did. And every time I was standing at the election booth, the election, what was it? It is called election booth, isn't it?
Yeah.
The place where the hall where the election is taking place, and the Labour candidate would always sidle up to me and say, "When are you coming over to us?" I
So
think,
would you throw your hat into the ring? Would you get involved in politics? And which party would you stick with the Tories, or would you go with
well,
the?
because the Tories is the only one I know, and I wouldn't go for Reform because it's so far over in no man's land, and Labour, I wouldn't insult Labour by pretending I'm a Labour candidate, even though I was talking to Piers Corbyn a while ago, and
He's
Piers.
he's an interesting figure.
Oh, he's mad as a bag of snakes. I mean, he's extraordinary, but a delightful man, and he always seems to remember the last conversation that we had. And he said, "Oh, I've got some notes for you here." And it's completely loopy. But
Is he
just,
estranged from his brother, or do
I
you know
have
if
no idea, but he's
okay.
just such a nice man. And I remember on this occasion, he said, "What is your political color?" I said, "Well, I think I'm a little bluer than you, um, but I think I'm probably to the left of Jeremy when it comes to education." And he said, "No one's to the left of my brother." I thought, that was hilarious. But at the time, Jeremy Corbyn was saying things like that in university funding, that there should be a distinction between STEM subjects and other subjects in terms of what the government funded.
Hmm.
And I think that's a misreading of university education. Maybe we need to trim university education, but university education, to me, there isn't a Mickey Mouse subject. Well, that's because I do theology, but there isn't a Mickey Mouse subject. Uh, every subject,
It has each has value, yes, in
yeah,
their
you
own
think of
merit.
education like a giant palace. Here I'm going to be quite Athenite in my theological imagery. You think of education as a sort of giant palace with many doors, and it doesn't matter which door you enter that palace. It could be the door of needlework or the door of English literature or maths. But once you get into that palace, ideally you would learn the same disciplines of stamina and discipline of testing your material and doing what you were asked to do. And maths is very different to English literature or theology, but essentially you've got that same discipline that you've got to produce the work, and you've got to do it to a standard of excellence. And I love that idea of it's biblical anyway. Christ, I think Matthew's gospel or something, be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect. But then Luke's gospel says no one is perfect but God alone. And you put those two things together, and you've got you've
A
got
bit of a conflict, yes.
yeah, you've got a conflict. That's politics. Politics is the art of living with people with whom you don't agree, and and we've got these ridiculous ideas about politics today. We've got people saying politics is about getting what you want. Nobody I know in politics has ever got what they want. Politics is about so the Nigel Farage thing, have a pint with Farage or whatever it is. I would love a pint with Farage. We wouldn't agree, but I think he's a very affable man.
Do you think, would you prefer to have a pint with Farage as opposed to a pint with Keir Starmer? I think the answer is quite
There
simple
would be
there.
no pint with Keir Starmer, but a couple of tonight. I would like Keir. I like his boredom. I aspire to boredom, um, and I think there's a lot to be said for being boring. I mean, sometimes I'm boring. I've sent myself to sleep in my own lecture, so um, I know I'm boring.
I don't think people who find I don't find you boring in any way whatsoever,
Well,
and I
that's
don't
because you're
think
not. That's because you're not exposed to me for too long. But on my own, I can realize there's a point. Oh, just my partner said when we were discussing whether or not I should be on this reality TV show, and we only had about 2 weeks to discuss it, and my partner was asked, what do you think, and the response was, oh well, you're the only time I could switch him off. And I thought,
get him out of the house for a bit.
that's the point. It's an opportunity that I would give me a bone and I just keep going with it. I'm like a dog, really. But the Nadine Dorries. Look, the problem with Nadine Dorries is reputational baggage. She has more reputational baggage than I don't know what I'm.
Have you read any of her books?
Yes, I've read all her
Oh
books.
my goodness.
I read when I was suffering from cancer. I really rolled the boat out. I took all her novels in with me, and I read them from cover to cover. And then I started writing my autobiography, um, under the influence of Mad Nads. And I thought, I still think she's a page turner. And the plot is better than a Bond novel, but it has the same structure and the same dynamic and the same logic.
When they
I
say
mean,
the writer puts themselves into the book. So how much of Nadine is in
I
in our
don't
novel?
recognize. I
No.
don't. The point is, if you think of those interviews in the central lobby in Westminster with Nadine on camera on Channel 4, I just look at those things. I remember looking at them. I was teaching in a school, I can't remember where, and I was doing a few YouTube videos at the time, not as many as I do now. And I was looking at this thing, and my mouth just dropped open. I couldn't believe this was the same person who was writing these extraordinarily racy books. And this is a person who is incoherent.
Maybe it's not her writing the books.
Oh, don't say such a rude thing. Um, it's, no, I think I just think there's something skewed in her brain, where she is, and listening to her in front of a DCMS committee,
Yes.
inarticulate and didn't know what an algorithm was. Well, I mean, I don't blame her there, really. An algorithm is something that fights against you, isn't it? It's like a little. Do you remember the Molesworth books?
I think so.
There's a little animal which is called I can't remember what it is, but it's a little animal. It's a furry animal. I think that's what an algorithm is. Yeah.
So let's get back to politics. So
Well,
what?
I think she's incoherent in real life, and I think yeah, and she's a she's a career she is a career contradiction. And she's a I was going to say a lover of Johnson. That would get me into serious trouble, wouldn't it? She's a she's
In
a
so many
devote
ways.
she's a devotee of Johnson. You know.
I think she was suggesting that Boris Johnson and Nigel Farage should hook up together and form some sort of
Well, Nigel, have you
pact of
heard Nigel
steel or
Farage?
something.
Nigel Farage dismissed that one. He said,
Yeah.
"Oh no, I don't think so. I mean, it would be competition, too much competition, and too much brain." Farage is very affable, but Boris Johnson has the brain of God. It's just so many things are racing around there. Truth is not an easy bedfellow. With
He is an
the
intelligent man, yes.
is I knew him briefly in Oxford. He was younger than me, but I sort of admired him. I didn't like his sister. I met his father in the last election. I was in the green room with his father and his sister, and but his father is an absolute charmer, such a nice man, and if you've got to spend an evening with somebody, I strongly recommend his father. Just a delight. Rory Stewart was there as well. I mean, he's so thin. But Boris Johnson's father, hats off. An absolute delight. But and who's the fellow with the teeth? Rylan. Rylan. It was a big Rylan gig as well. And I met Rylan more recently, with Carol Vorderman. One of them gave me COVID.
Oh my God.
But I think. And
Did
I
you say
think it was
thank you?
Carol Vorderman.
Did you say thank you?
Well, I didn't know it was happening at the time. I was so I was so distracted by the teeth. But Rylan is another fellow with a brain, blessed with the brain of God. I mean, these are bright people. Boris Johnson, Rylan, these are people
So
who.
when you look at the modern Conservative Party, how
There's
do you
not a
feel?
brain to be found. Not a brain to be found anywhere. Kemi Badenoch, she can barely string a sentence together. I mean, I think she does slightly better than Nads. But Kemi Badenoch, if she hasn't got it written out in front of her, she doesn't know what she's going to say. The other day, not Rachel Reeves. That's wishful thinking. Angela Rayner had just resigned. Sorry, I know you tend to lean to the left. Sorry, but
I'm
Angela
not. I'm
Rayner.
not offended. I'm not.
Uh,
I actually supported the idea of her leaving because for consistency as well. If the Tories are up to no good, I've said that they had to go, and if the Labour Party are up to no good, even if it's complicated, but I was backing the idea of her going because it was looking bad for the party. Anyway, sorry. Go ahead,
Yeah,
Tim.
you look bad for the party. I mean, my position is that whoever is in government, I think I have to support at least as far as possible, because I want the country to do well, and
Yes.
I don't feel at the moment the government is doing as well. If they asked me to help, I would help.
But
Um,
what advice would you give them? Because I think they're focusing too much on immigration. I think
yes,
they're trying
yes.
to out
Oh,
Farage all the time, and the
yeah. No,
Tories.
they have to. So
Sorry, go.
the same thing with the Conservatives. I would give the Conservatives and the Labour Party the same advice. I would say, do what you do. Bring the Conservative Party back round to the centre, and remember all the well, they used to be the blue rinse people. You've lost all of those. Get back to them. You don't want so there's talk now of Robert Jenrick being crowned when Kemi Badenoch steps down. That's the worst of all possible worlds. Robert Jenrick was a sweetie years ago. He's not going to be sweetie anymore. He's a bitter mint, and he needs to be spat out. And but the problem is if Badenoch continues for much longer, the reform-leaning Conservatives will go over to reform, which will bring in the Lib Dems as the opposition. Now, if Jenrick comes in, that will stop that, but it will kill the Conservative Party completely. I think they will try an alliance with Reform. Reform won't quite get there. The Conservatives won't quite get there, and my prediction is that the Labour Party will go in for a second term with a
With the
with
Lib
help.
Dems or
Yeah, and and uh, uh, and I would much rather see a revival of the Lib Dems, which is possible. We're at that sort of, and the Lib Dems quite wisely are keeping quiet. But no, my advice to both the Conservatives would be to do what you do, and to the Labour Party is to get back to what you are, rather than trying to. We need immigration. You have to listen to Sadiq Khan. Um, and we need immigrants, number one. Our country is built on immigration, which is what Ryland said. He admits that. But then you have to go a little bit further. You have to say, look, the so-called illegal immigrations, they're only illegal immigrants because Britain has defined that so under Suella Braverman in one of her three spurious laws, the nationality and borders law, the illegal immigration law, and then the Rwanda law. All of them need to be repealed, and Keir Starmer should do that. I know it's on the I know it's a work in process, in progress. There's going to be one law to repeal the lot, but he said he didn't want to do Rwanda. That means scrapping this nonsense. All of it has to go, and then we have to scrap the nonsense which came with it, which was the logic of Priti Patel and Suella Braverman seems to have been we want to annoy local people so much by putting migrants in hotels that there will be riots in the street, and then the local people will tell us how bad these immigrants are, and we'll be able to throw them away. But the point is, it's a compounded problem, starting off with Theresa May, um, who I mean, you're not going to like this because all Theresa May did was to implement David Blunkett's nonsense, which in turn was developed by which was development from Straw,
no,
uh,
they had a hardline approach to immigration.
which
Yes, they were very
crystallizes
much.
in the hostile environment.
Yeah.
The hostile environment is simply an excuse for the civil service in the Home Office to stop working and to go slow, and that's appalling. And now we've got the consequence of that, where we've got such a backlog that even if people were working flat out for a year, they still wouldn't move that significant
Yeah,
problem.
it was something like it would take 30 years to get the backlog down to zero if they were going at the current pace.
So because one person can do about two cases a month. This is nonsensical. So you have an initial judgment, and then you have an appeals process. So a lot of the people in the hotels have already gone through the initial process. They're in the appeals process. That still keeps them in the hotels. What we need to do is to have a more European approach, where if somebody's gone through the initial process, uh, they should be given a purple card or something and be allowed to
allowed
work
to
and be
work. Yeah.
allowed to
But
move in.
I think there's also another problem another problem that's not brought up very often is the home countries. So they're talking about we need to send a lot of people back to Afghanistan or to Pakistan or to India. But there was an interesting interview with a guy who used to work at the Home Office on Times Radio Today, where he mentioned how, well, we can do our bit to send people back, but if those countries say no, or if those countries make it difficult, and in many cases they will say, well, we need to see paperwork, we need to see proof that the person you're sending to us is actually somebody from this country. And this slows down the process as well. So even if Farage took over tomorrow, he would still face a lot of the problems that the Conservative faced.
Except he said he's going to bribe the Taliban, and they're only too happy to have some of their naughty boys and back, so they can put them in prison and torture them. It's an appalling idea, and the idea of putting them in a third country like Rwanda or Albania has been floated. Albania has said no, by the way, so that's not going to happen.
Italy had a similar problem. They were trying to send people to Albania, and then they
Well,
discovered the Court of Justice said, no, you can't do that.
well, they weren't doing it on the same way. They
No,
were
no.
sending they wanted to send them to Albania before the processing took place. Um, which I think would be a legitimate option. But as you say, yeah,
But the problem was that there was no true oversight. So people could be sent there, but you didn't know what the conditions were, and it'd be difficult for the Italian government to uphold certain standards because it's in another country, and it'd be difficult for the people there to access the lawyers or the support they need. So there were a lot of problems, and the Court of Justice, the European Court of Justice said, and it wasn't even the ECHR, it was the European Court of Justice, and they said, no, this isn't good enough. You need to do some more work.
but I think
Meloni was not too happy about that.
I think there is a case for other countries to work together. What we need to do is to re-examine the 1951 Refugee Convention, and to re-examine this idea, the Dublin Protocol as well, and to re-examine this idea that if migrants come in to one country, how do we share that accommodation of those migrants over the European Union and the countries associated around the European area? And so I think there would be a room for Albania. And as I say, one of the ways that a migrant can demonstrate their commitment is by working,
Yes.
and by paying tax, and by integrating. So, people don't have a very good word for Israel at the moment, but I have a really good word for Israel, in terms of its acceptance of people who go on Aliyah, and they return to Israel. The first thing they're given is an immediate induction
Cultural
into
course.
yeah, and we should be doing the same thing.
But I've often said, but the integration also has to be both ways. So people who are arriving in a country, you've lived abroad, you've integrated into the countries you've lived in. I'm in Italy. I've tried my best to integrate as much as possible. But I think there's also a responsibility on politicians to help people integrate. And it really grinds my gears when I hear about Farage and others saying, oh, these people are not integrating. And I would love to ask him, well, what have you done to help these people integrate? Like, have you actually met with them? Have you brought them a cake? Have you tried to bring them to an event, an English event, St. George's Day or something like that, and explain to them, this is what we do, this is what we like, gave them a Cornish pasty to eat. It sounds trivial, but these are little things to help people integrate. And I hear nothing from Robert Jenrick, I hear nothing from Farage, because I think at the end of the day, they don't care whether these people integrate. It's just they want to use them as a cudgel.
Yes, and as a topic, but
Yes.
we need that level of integration first of all. There's nothing worse than keeping people, particularly they keep going, the flag wavers go on about young men kept in hotels. Well, keeping young men in hotels with nothing to do, indolent, and feeling frightened, This is a
The,
powder keg.
wasn't it the devil makes work for idle hands?
Anybody who comes into the country should automatically, if they've got nothing else to do, they should be studying English, or they should,
Or doing some volunteer work. If they're not allowed to work, then
absolutely,
give
and
them.
demonstrate how much you want to come here and you want to integrate with this country. Um, and, uh, and I'm sure there's ways to do that. And then the Home Office says, well, even when we give people permission to work, it's only in a limited field of things. But
Yes.
you've got people who are trained as doctors, people who are trained as nurses, who are part of this immigrant population, and they're suddenly told, you've got to go and paint the street or something. This is madness. They're treated like criminals, and then we expect them to behave well. What is extraordinary is the majority of migrants behave impeccably and are still grateful to be here. And of course, in every part of our society, in every part of any society, you have people who are bad, and you have the occasional criminal um, activity.
Look
And
at
it's
politics.
terrible.
Like there are
Well,
some bad eggs in
look at
politics.
politics. You have somebody who hits somebody, and Amesbury. I mean, is Amesbury the fellow who sloshed someone 6 times, and he gets clemency, and yet Lucy Connolly gets kept in for her words. I don't understand that. I'm
Well,
not saying it's martyr or
no,
anything.
no,
I'm
no.
saying
Well, I,
clemency.
I don't want to push back on you because it's not about this, but
Push back, please push back.
no, well, when it comes to him, so the yeah, I think it was Ricky Jones. I think his name was. Sounds
No,
like
it's not Ricky Jones. Ricky Jones is another man. I'm talking about the man who hit one of his own.
he was a Labour councillor as well, though I think.
No, the person who hit his constituent was a Labour MP,
Okay.
and he did 3 days in prison, or he did 3 nights in prison, I think, and was then told, "Oh, you've learnt your lesson." Yeah, but
Not
you,
really, but yeah. So I'm not familiar with that case, but I'm more familiar with Lucy Connolly. And when it came to Lucy Connolly, she was actually arrested under the 1986 Public Order Act, and this is something.
which means she couldn't have pleaded not guilty. Which is what the black barrister says. Is it called the black barrister? Yeah,
Black
it is.
belt
Black,
ban.
black belt barrister says he would have recommended that she should have pleaded guilty. That wouldn't have been possible under that law. She would, because the law is based on the effect she has, not her intention, and the effect was demonstrable in the riot. So she was doomed. I think the only thing she could have done is waited on clemency, and that clemency should have come. If the clemency came to an MP who punched one of his own constituents, it should have come to her. And as for the fellow who did the throat slitting imagery, I mean,
I actually think he should have gone to jail, but I understand that the jury found him not guilty because no one acted out after what he did. So while he made a threat,
no one did any throat slitting. Yes,
exactly.
but but it was also different. He was able to say that he was using figurative language, and it wasn't
And
quite.
he also apologized for it, and he
But so did Lucy Connolly. I think this is. I think we're in dodgy areas where our laws are not well structured, and a lot of the recent laws, certainly since the turn of the century, have been done on the hoof, have been done with a sort of knee-jerk desperation, without the sort of care that was taking place in the 1970s and 1980s.
I think the difference between now and back in the 1970s, 1980s is that a lot of the communication back then was, of course, written in newspapers. So it was something very clear that people could, okay, this is,
Yeah.
we know exactly who it's coming from. And now it's maybe with social media, anyone can just jump up on Twitter or on Facebook or whatever and write whatever they want. And I think people are, I'm not saying that you are, but I'm saying I think a lot of people are getting the idea that, well, people are getting punished for what they're writing and not the intent behind what they're writing.
Yes, I wouldn't say that.
Okay.
But so my thing about Lucy Connolly is about clemency, and Lucy Letby. I think there are similar issues. I think we need to look at this idea of clemency. I think we need to, because I think we need to look at what prison is for. This is where I come from. I'm very much in the mold of prison reform, and I want to ask, what is prison doing? Is it keeping people out of sight and out of mind, or is it going to make people better people afterwards? And I would like to take the second view, and I think we've lost sight of that. And this is where people like Rory Stewart are just so wonderful, and I think he was moving in that direction and then was stopped. And it's a great
I don't know if
shame.
you, yeah, no, I don't know if you saw some of the clips of some of the people who were let out of prison recently by the Labour government. It was a couple of months back, and I
It's not
remember
necessary.
one particular guy who'd been released, and he said, "I'm going to commit crime again because I've nowhere to go." So while there may have been some support on the inside, there was no support on the outside. And he said, "Look, I don't have a home to go to. I'm homeless now. I was in prison. I had 3 meals a day or whatever. Now I have literally nothing." So I think while there's a lot of focus on, as you said, clemency or dealing with or just punishing people, keeping them away from society, when these people are released, and many of them are not violent criminals, but when they are released, they need some support in the community.
Because you have to readjust
Yeah.
to an entirely different society. I mean, if it took me 5 years to adjust to life after being on reality TV, that was just a month of losing agency. How much agency you lose in prison? You lose all your agency in prison. It takes a long time to rehabilitate to a world where you're taking responsibility for yourself. Um, it's you become institutionalized. Well, many people have been institutionalized, and you have to very gradually introduce people to um, the sanity of or the insanity of real life. It's very difficult. We have to return very quickly to Nadine Dorries, because I can see how time I don't I feel you've hardly got a word in edgewise. Chattering for an hour almost. But the problem with Nadine Dorries is, I think, from a point of view of Reform UK, I don't understand why they took her in. They say they wouldn't want to take in Boris Johnson. Well, Nadine Dorries, the toxicity that she must be oozing against swing voters, and
But
the
I think
association with failure.
But I think it's more about the immigration. So a lot of them blame Boris Johnson for the rising numbers of immigrants coming in. So if you listen to some of the interviews about why reform, I don't know about Nigel Farage himself, and he's a bit opaque. But when it comes to others, within Reform UK, a lot of them will say, well, Boris Johnson is to blame for the rise in immigration. When he was in charge, he opened the floodgates, he had open borders. So this has rubbed a lot of them the wrong way. Not that I agree. I'm not agreeing with them, but
it's not entirely true, of course. The person who did that was Lord Frost,
yes.
and the people who were negotiating, and that all starts with Theresa May. And the negotiations with Europe simply didn't think about Ireland. They just seemed to think this was a non-part of the United Kingdom, and so, for example, Chris Heaton Harris worked his backside off to try and repair the damage left by Lord Frost, and even he really, it's a plaster job, the Windsor Framework, but it's better. It's better than the Northern Ireland Protocol, or the Northern Ireland Agreement, or whatever it was. But
Protocol,
the Dublin Protocol is the thing that we lost, and we
yes.
could easily have set up something like that. But there's desperation for a pure break. Uh,
But even, as you know, like the Erasmus scheme, nothing political really about the Erasmus scheme. Just allowing young people to go to Europe, or young people in Europe to come to Britain. And, it's a win-win on both sides. But because it contained the word Europe, and the Brexiteers were like, we need a clean break. We don't want anything to do. The European
Nothing.
Union were saying, yeah, you can have Erasmus. We're not going to fight you on that. And Boris Johnson said no. Now, I don't know whether it was because Boris Johnson was an ideologue. I'm not completely convinced of
I
that.
don't think so.
But I think it's the people
Boris Johnson,
behind him.
remember, Boris Johnson speaks French very comfortably. He is a European. He lived in Brussels. I mean, from that point of view, he would also know the problems with Europe.
Yes.
He has affection for Europe. I think Boris Johnson was very much pulled by the movement. He just wanted that thing done, and he wanted to go down in history as somebody who'd achieved something. All he achieved was a piece of cake. That defines him now, unfortunately. Boris Johnson,
Yeah, I have a feeling that if things had gone the other way, Boris Johnson could have eventually been president of the European Commission.
yes, I think there's no doubt, and he made the wrong choice.
Hmm.
Um, and and I think that's partly because Boris, for all his brain, doesn't think things through. And Lord Frost, who he delegated all this rubbish to, doesn't think things through. And how do we know this? We know this very clearly because Lord Frost thinks that he can leave the House of Lords and stand as a stand for the House of Commons as an MP. He cannot leave the House of Lords. So, oh well, I can renounce my peerage. You can't. You can only renounce the peerage if you've inherited the peerage, and only then within a year or so of inheriting. There is no mechanism for renouncing a life peer. And and so if Lord Frost can't read the small print of his own peerage, it demonstrates how unbelievably stupid he was, and how he's absolutely the wrong man for the job of negotiating Brexit. I didn't want Brexit. I voted against Brexit, but in the same way as I'm very loyal to a prime minister of another party, I'm equally loyal to the principle of Brexit, and I wanted Brexit to work, but it was in the hands of twits, unbelievable twits, and it's still in the hands of twits. They change the name occasionally, but they don't change their mental capacity, and and I don't understand. There is nothing good that's come out of Brexit. Occasionally, you may say, "Oh well, it's not as harmful as you thought." Well, yeah, okay. When you've been stabbed and you think, "Well, it's not bleeding as much now. I'll get a cloth."
It's not a benefit. It's not something positive.
Well, if you stop bleeding for a while, that's good. When I was younger, I have haemophilia, and when I was younger, they used to do a thing where they take your arm and they get a blade and they cut your arm, and then they wait there with a piece of blotting paper and they see how much you bleed. It's called the bleeding time, and they would always do the same joke and say, "What's the bleeding time?" And and now they don't have to do it because they've got better systems. Um, but so I'm quite used to the idea that you get cut and you bleed, and there's a point when the bleeding starts to stop and you start to clot. And you think, oh, that's good, you're clotting, um, and and I think that's like Brexit. You're clotting, but you still got cut, and
Yes.
it's still nasty, and there's no benefit from it. And yeah, maybe other people are going to take pity on you, like Australia and so on. Well, they're there with plasters saying, "Oh, would you like this bandage? We could do a trade agreement with you. Let's wrap you up in a bit of in a little trade agreement. There's some words. Ooh, hurty words. They won't hurt you that much." Uh,
We'll have to end it there,
Will, I'm
Professor
so
Seb.
sorry.
No, no, me too.
I've
But
rabbited on. I've
it
rabbited
was
on. I
great to
once
have you
thought
on.
about Bridget Phillipson. I thought that would be rather jolly.
But maybe again, we'll have you back on again to talk about more about some other
Brace
political
myself.
figures.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for having me.
My
It's,
pleasure. Where can we find out more of your stuff? So you're on YouTube. Do you have other social media accounts that we could?
not really. I'm on YouTube. I have Instagram, and I do actually have TikTok, but I don't understand how it works. And I'm once I work. I did have somebody who came to explain it all to me. And I thought, oh, that makes sense. But when they're explaining it to you, that you've got this sort of beady look in their eyes as if they're trying to sell you something. You think, "Oh, I understand everything," and then when they
I
go,
don't
"Well,
I don't understand TikTok either. I put out a video and it get like 1,000 views, and then I'd flip up, and then there'd be somebody doing like a sort of weird dance, and I'd look and it'd have like
yeah,
5 million views, and I'm like, okay, to hell with that.
yeah," well, I can do the weird dance as well, but no. So if somebody can teach me TikTok, I'll do TikTok. But I do Instagram. I
And
do
many videos on YouTube.
on YouTube, and you don't have to agree with me. In fact, I rather hope you don't.
Find
And
it.
everybody on YouTube, I have to point this out.
Yes.
Everybody on YouTube, I read all the comments and then I heart everybody because I think You've been so nice, dedicating your time to being rude, and thank you so much. And some of them are
That
asking
got me a
not.
bit confused because sometimes I'd write something on your channel and then I'd see you'd had a heart on something that I think, well, that person disagrees with Tim, and why is he giving him a heart? So you're doing
Because
it out of
I,
of the kindness of your heart.
if they can, it's not the kindness of my heart. I want to encourage debate. I mean, there are times if I notice somebody is being rude about someone else, then I will get rid of them if I can remember how to do it. It's very complicated to get rid of people on YouTube. And
Oh,
and then
you have a new subscriber, Peter Nancaro has subscribed to your channel, so that's
oh,
great.
lovely. Thank you so much, Peter. But no, if the problem is some of the nastier people, you get rid of them and they come back on with a different name,
Yes.
or they're already working under about four names, and you notice that they've got the same grammar. Either that, or they're a bot or something. But and sometimes they're making little errors in English, which are typically Russian, which I find rather
Oh,
exciting.
very
Yeah.
interesting. You're able to spot them. So guys, I want to say thanks to everyone who came on tonight. Thanks for your support on the stream tonight. Do check out Professor Tim's YouTube channel. He covers politics like myself, but with more razzmatazz, can I say? And we'll finish there. Thanks so much, and I'll see
I'd
you all
say,
on Friday. Sorry, Tim. You were saying?
I was going to say, occasionally I sing.
Yes. Very good.
I don't know whether that's a positive. Like, you've got a thing on Friday?
Yes, on Friday. So I have another live stream on Friday. So do check that out. And have a great week, guys. And I'll see you on Friday. Take care and good night. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.